Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. You are listening to a podcast by Pastor Eric Deepen and Pastor Andy Littleton. If you enjoy Faith Over Breakfast, we encourage you to rate it on the Apple Podcast app, on Spotify, or Google Play. Thank you and enjoy the podcast. Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. My name is Eric and I am pastor of the Village Church in Tucson, Arizona. And across from me is both my colleague and in a different world than podcasting, my co-host, pastor of Mission Church, Tucson, Arizona.
Hello.
And we're headed up to Phoenix for a big meeting.
Going to the meetings. This is us getting having some freedom before the meetings.
Freedom before the meetings. Yeah. So anyway, so we talked about.
I mean, we went. It's church politics.
Yeah.
How are our people doing? How are we doing? How do we view our role?
Yeah, and I think we probably gave. I would feel like a little. It was very vulnerable and a little bit of guidance to how you might approach present day issues. At least getting you started thinking through things, and maybe we get you a little disrupted.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think it was a great conversation.
I do too.
So I hope you all get something out of it and enjoy it. This is us showing up. Our concept is we sit down at a breakfast table and just have the conversation we would have if we were meeting for pancakes with a little bit of raspberry jam.
That's right.
So that's the specific breakfast of the day. I'm hungry. I haven't had any breakfast, but we did have coffee. And Eric, thanks for bringing the good stuff.
Yeah,
conversationally and coffee-wise.
Ooh, all right, guys.
You're going to leave that, knowing you.
Should we set this up here?
Okay, so
I don't know.
So the coffee that I mentioned last time is being served, but Eric's saying it's watered down, and I have a theory that he didn't want me to make him bring this coffee anymore. So he's giving me the B- edition of it. But thank you. Thank you for bringing the good coffee. Let's see. Let's see. Here's first slurp. Remember when we used to eat and drink on the air? The good old days.
That's not terrible.
Yeah, it's got a unique taste. I see what you're getting at. It's not. No, it's not. I don't want syrup. I don't want to get.
Right.
I don't want to get a coat in my throat when I drink coffee.
Coat in my throat.
I want it to wash right down, nice and smooth.
It's faith over breakfast, people.
Faith over breakfast.
At
least we've got coffee.
Did you already have breakfast?
I didn't. I did not eat breakfast. I don't know if I will today.
Yeah, we're going to see each other a lot tonight and tomorrow.
Yeah, we're going into denominational meetings.
Oh, our favorite.
Yeah. I live for a good marathon meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, they matter.
I need to go over the reports at some point.
Yeah, that's we gotta take in a sermon. I thought it was a recorded one, so I was all pumped to listen to it on the way up to Phoenix, and then I realized it's printed. But then I thought, this is why I have Speechify. So I'm gonna listen to the elder from Phoenix's sermon in Snoop Dogg's voice.
So he doesn't have like a YouTube video?
I'm pretty sure it is just printed.
Yeah.
I thought it was recorded, but
wow.
For some reason. Yeah. I've been informed it's not. So,
okay.
So Snoop Dogg's going to read it to me. And I think that's going to make a big difference.
I need to download Speechify.
I'm probably going to vote for his ordination purely because of his vocal inflection.
So if I get Speechify and I pay for it.
You do have to pay.
But I hear there's a strategy with Speechify.
Oh.
So you get the free thing.
Uh-huh.
Then you cancel.
Uh-huh.
They will send you a 50% discount.
Oh.
And then when it goes to renew, you cancel. And they'll send you another 50% discount.
Oh. Well, I wish somebody would have told me because I paid full price. Yeah. But it's great. I mean, I'm doing some school, and there's a lot of PDFs, and you can take pictures of book pages, and it'll read it well, especially because I'm commuting to Phoenix. That's a great time. I just listen to all my papers. It's super helpful.
Nice.
Anyway,
So
Hey, good to see you today. So we're gonna see each other a lot, but this
we are
is
gonna see each other a lot.
This is the pre-game.
Yeah, pregame, and you were talking about maybe there's these anxieties within your community.
Well,
About
yeah,
the president of the United States.
well, yeah. I was so pre, finalization of the election or just after it. We had a conversation, and I think where my head was at the time was I was engaging in some hopefulness that maybe this round would be different, and
Right.
that it maybe wouldn't be quite as intense because there was a bigger voter base for Trump and so on.
Right.
And here's how I feel, just sort of short and simple, is that it is different and in the direction I was not hoping for. I think it's more intense, actually, in my opinion. But I was saying to you that, at least in my church, I'm noticing there is a hesitance to talk about it.
Yeah.
But I'm noticing a little more sense that, well, okay, I think people are very divided on it. I think some people just aren't showing up right now because of it, and because they just don't want to deal with it again. So I think the last time there was more open conversation, people wanted to work it out, and this time I think people don't. But I think the divide is deep, and people are very concerned or frustrated, or even have positive opinions they don't want to talk about because that could get you in trouble with people too.
Yeah.
And there's just a lot of silent division mostly.
So I saw a little clip on it was a Bill Murray.
Okay.
He was being interviewed.
Bill Murray, great Cubs fan.
Yeah.
What a guy. Okay.
So Bill was talking about how over the last couple of years, what he has noticed is that, he goes into like something where he's got to get something done with someone. That's a work together, and they have something in common.
Yeah.
And they enjoy that and they get focused. But if they talk about politics, they could get as far as being enemies of one another.
Very quick. Yeah.
Not talking about politics at all is kind of the path that most people are choosing.
And I totally understand that. This is just a couple experiences for me lately. So number one, went to a hip hop show. Really, my wife and I went, some friends went, guy that I've liked for a long time. And he got very specifically political there, which is not unexpected. This is underground hip hop. This part of the culture is to confront things and speak to things, especially like this vein. It's not doesn't surprise me, but I found myself, not that it didn't have to do with my agreement or disagreement per se, but I just actually found myself going, oh man, I don't want to do this. Like, I'm at a concert. I don't want to do this. I do this all the time.
Right.
There was a period when I was younger when hip hop artists, in my experience, would speak to these things where I was like, man, this is good. This needs to be said. And this is just gut response was, I don't want to do this.
You're getting old, man.
Well, getting weary. Like old is a thing, but I think I see the same thing in my teenage kid, where it's just like
tired.
Yeah, this doesn't go anywhere good. Like that's how it feels. I'm not saying it's true, because if people stop being honest, that's not good, I think. So anyway, there was that. And then I've been getting together with childhood friends as part of my upcoming friendship book journey that I'd love to talk to you more about in the future. But I met up with some childhood friends, and both times it was great. I had a great time. We did not talk anything about politics. And I did wonder about it. What if it comes up? And because I so wanted to connect with them and have a good experience, the truth is I was hoping it wouldn't. And I think if it had, I probably would have just soft pedaled it. I think I would have not because I was like, I want to reconnect with people, and I don't want to like introduce like what Bill Murray is saying. I don't want this to go like, oh, never mind. Well, no, I have no evidence to say it would have. My point is just it's possible. And that dynamic, when you and I were talking before we walked in here, I sense that dynamic is happening with us as well as pastors.
I don't want to talk about it.
Well, I don't want to talk about it, or the explosiveness this could have within my community is not worth it.
Oh yeah, I mean if we say stuff from here
or here or anywhere.
Yeah.
So what do we do with that?
Well, I mean,
I'm hearing the critique of that in my other ear right now.
Oh, he's hard.
Well, but for real though, like there's a valid critique of that at some point.
At some level.
There's a wisdom and there's a critique, and I think I'm struggling with which one's which and where does it.
Well, I think that everything is political, right? So we're going to the denominational thing, and
that's politics. I define it as such. This is living with others.
Yes, they're power structures.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
What's up, everyone? Steve here with the Balance of Gray podcast. It's a brand new podcast.
That's good news.
Funny news stories, serious topics, and spiritual growth.
Phenomenon is what it is.
I can promise this won't be quite like anything you've heard before in a Christian podcast. The Balance of Gray brings raw discussions that get to the root of some of the hardest questions. In every few episodes, we feature inspiring testimonies from those who have walked the walk. There's already a good lineup of episodes for you to dive into, so go check them out and tune in on Wednesdays for a great time and a bold twist on igniting your faith. You can find the Balance of Gray podcast on nearly every listening platform out there. Start listening now.
Pretty good, huh?
Yeah. And the procedures to get things done, and to help the larger community.
How do we live a shared life?
Right.
All the ways that we're going to have to manage that.
So there's a few things I think about when I process all of this. First and foremost, I hold dearly to 1 Peter and the fact that I am a sojourner and an exile. So I do not belong to this kingdom.
Same.
I think I can go all the way through the Sermon on the Mount and much of what Jesus says in particular in Matthew to build this sort of an alternative kingdom, an alternative politic. But I also
we
realize
still do exist.
That Jesus was not checking Instagram.
Right.
Jesus didn't live amongst the people who were constantly connected to 1 billion people at any given time, right? In a response.
I have a weird hot take that I'll save on Instagram and Jesus.
Yeah, okay.
Don't let me forget it.
I will not.
It's a weird line of thought, but I think I want to share it.
Okay. So I think about these things and I'm thinking, okay, so what seems to me to be very clear is that Jesus is very concerned with people knowing him and is very concerned about living out an alternative way of being in the midst of the larger kingdom. In fact, he says things repeatedly like the Gentiles rule over each other this way. Or Paul then says he equates the powers and the kingdoms of both human beings and their powers behind them who aren't followers of Jesus as given to their passions, given not into a holy way of being. So I do think, okay, so my community, your community, the larger Christian community, both Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant, like we're called to this different way of living. People should be able to see like, oh, this is different. So when I begin to be outward facing in that, and I go to my school district and I begin to deal with things, well, the national level of politics is going to affect my local level of politics, which is going to then say, okay, forget my school district, it's going to affect my streets. It's going to affect my home. So as I am an alternative community, how do I interface with the pagan community, like the pagan rulers?
And citizens who would consider the pagan government the primary one, or believers who would say they are one and the same.
So how do I operate? So I think that my job is to, depending on my status within this larger community, so the whole world, I need to figure out where I am and what God's inviting me to say. So as a pastor, I may be called to have some form of critique of power. That's what we're called to do. So it's not necessarily I agree with everything that Donald Trump is doing or Biden is doing. My job is to say that is gospel and that is not.
Now, can you build really quick? Because you said that, but I'm thinking. So the job of the pastor is to critique power
for the community itself.
Where do you come up with that? Like, where's that coming from?
Well, I think Paul critiqued power. I think he critiqued it to its face.
Yeah.
And I think Jesus always critiqued religious power, but I always think it's a joke. And I think New Testament scholars do this all the time. And evangelical scholars, they do. And I'm like, it's not there, guys. You cannot tell me that he's critiquing the religious rulers, and now let's take the religious rulers and replace them and say, oh, that the church is the religious. No, they are the power body that Jesus is encountering. And yes, they are a power body that is claiming the Yahweh God, but they are a power body, and he is critiquing the way they are treating the people. And so I think there is a lot for us, yes, an internal critique about what Jesus was saying to the Pharisees, but there is an external critique. When the government treats the poor with a heavy yoke, when they treat the outcast with a heavy yoke, then we have to say, no, that's the yoke of the enemy. That's the yoke of corruption and brokenness. That is not the yoke of Jesus.
I tend to think of it as a little bit of a hybrid when you talk about because I agree. We've been discussing some moments in Acts where the Sanhedrin is, pulling the apostles before them. And I've been trying to help our folks understand that this is the religious governing body. This is the priests and the scribes.
And they govern more than just the religious days of,
and that's where I was headed. They actually have the temple guard, which is a form of law enforcement under their control. They try capital crimes under Jewish, jurisdiction.
Yeah.
They're to some degree reliant and collaborative with Rome, especially because the high priests are Sadducees. Even though they have mixed feelings on that. But then there are different schools of even Phariseeism at the time. But there's anyway, I say that to say, I think when that body is critiqued by Jesus, there's a sense in which people do experience them as the spokespeople for God's people, but they definitely have a political status and role in that society.
So I think the thing that seems very clear to me from Jesus is that what I'm supposed to return around and say to my community, what we as followers of Jesus are to say as one another, is we're supposed to check each other when we act like Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. We're supposed to check each other when we act like Joe Biden. We're supposed to check ourselves when we look and act like the pagan government and say, no, that's the way of the pagan government. That is not the way of the community of God.
Now, we have to acknowledge here for a second that there are brothers and sisters in Christ who we know, I think less in our particular churches, who would say, no, it's not the pagan government. This is God's ordained government for this country. Like there's a good sized group of those folks, maybe even some tuning in right now.
And I think if you press those people, you might find that what they would need to parse that God's ordained, and then they would back off that a little bit.
I think you're right, but I'm just saying, like on presenting, and I think I'm always thinking about our missionary call, and I'm thinking about our friends and neighbors who I think a lot of my friends and neighbors would say, you Christians seem to say, through your words, through your memes, through your whatever, that this is a fused reality, that you've got, that archangel with his hands on the back of this man's, shoulders.
Right, and all the people praying over him.
And so in their experience, it sure looks like we don't view that as the pagan government. Mm-hmm. No, I'm not saying that's you, that's me. We do not have that view at all from a scriptural standpoint.
I'm going to be real blunt. because I refuse to judge the internal devotion to Jesus of people. When I see the external laying on of hands and I see heads bowed, I think, okay, they may not be doing everything that I want them to do, or I think there's arrogance in places that I think is inappropriate, or maybe I actually see probably one of the first most well-organized conspiracies ever in a group of people who are all good friends.
Sure.
I also see people who I think love Jesus and who are at least following their intention of what they think Jesus is saying. And I get a little irritated on the people who I lean more towards who try to tell me that that isn't Christianity and that they've demented it, because I'm like, yeah, so have you. Like, I think that I'm very, no, it doesn't mean I'm not willing to call out the Donald Trump presidency or the Biden presidency or whatever. I just think, okay, they are bowing their heads and praying. They are invoking Jesus' name. The Spirit is most likely groaning in that space for what cannot be said.
Well, and I agree with you in that. I believe that so we are called to pray for those in authority over us. And so if someone is taking that call from Scripture and they are attempting to follow it, and maybe they are wholeheartedly following it, and time will tell how that boat. If you end up deciding that was was it a good choice? Was it? But if you're trying to follow Jesus, this whole I agree with you. I am not super pleased with either side of the spectrum looking at the other and saying you're not a Christian because of this. I actually don't think that's super helpful.
Right.
Or I'm not going to associate with you. I think that's actually detrimental. I think we have to stay committed to each other and do the hard work. And this is what I just don't. I've actually learned recently that I think the Western United States is even worse about this. There are very few communities where if you do the hard work of being honest with each other about this, that you stay in the church together. People, I just had an experience of talking to some folks from the Midwest. They were talking about a guy who'd been critiquing a church decision vocally for a decade, and it was just so wearisome. And I told him, I said, you know what I'm surprised about? I'm surprised he's still there. I'm surprised he's been critiquing that for 10 years. To me, that's like, I wish I'd experienced that.
Yeah.
I wish we'd see somebody in our church who said, I disagree with your decision, but I'm here. Like, it's unfortunately people who do that usually just leave. And that's how community just gets severed and cut down and chopped.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I would agree with you. I think something that, so Blaine Eldridge says this in his book, Paradise King, of which Daniel quoted in his sermon on Sunday, and I'll see if I can grab it. But he said that one of the things that's really hard for us, and I'll just paraphrase everything, is that we are scandalously free, meaning that your choices impact me, Donald Trump's choices. Like, we are free to make choices that have impact.
Yeah.
And that the other thing that is so frustrating for us all is that we are not God. And I think that in itself is the thing that creates such a difficulty in conversation, is that I don't like that you can have another opinion, that you can act on it, and that feels not good to me.
Right.
And it puts us at least a disagreement or something where I feel like you don't understand. And at the same time, I cannot make you understand or vote a certain way or make certain choices because I'm not God. Right. And so I'm frustrated with both. And I think
our version of being God is I will not associate with you.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear it. I don't want to look at you if you feel that way.
Yeah. And I think some of that has just become over the last 20 years of just not we don't know the art of discourse.
Right.
So we don't know how to just we have moved to a destruction of people instead of just having good conversation.
I think we don't know the art of discourse. I don't know that we have it's almost too much sports in my life recently, but I'm thinking we don't have the endurance for it.
Yeah. No.
Because good, long, meaningful relationship that works stuff out, I think we feel a little anxiety and we're out because we're overwhelmed. and maybe that gets into all the social media and stuff. My hot take was, what if Jesus was the only one on Instagram back then? Here's what I mean. So what we're struggling with is we see all the news and all the thoughts, and we have way too much information. If anybody can actually understand that a little bit, it might be Jesus, who knew their hearts. And I'm not saying, obviously, it wasn't social media, but like of everyone in the situation back in biblical times, the closest to knowing what it's like to be us might have been Jesus. That's my take. He actually knew more than presented, and we think we know more.
Yeah. So here's kind of, I want to go down this road a little bit. So when we first planted the village, the thing that was being talked about a lot, because we were, Gen X was the group you're ministering to, the young people at the time, and extreme sports were the thing, like
living in extreme
having
days.
an experience, right? Versus that's what we need.
High adrenaline,
high adrenaline, all the extreme sports. That's what they were called that, and so that was talked about a lot in the church, giving people an experience. People are looking for an experience, like a depth, one that had a depth to it, and all that kind of stuff, and that like wave of experience seems to now just be a normal part of life. Like
you feel like you're experiencing stuff constantly.
Yeah, and you have to have intensity, and everything has to be more and more and more intense. And so when you say, well, what if God calls us to a life that is, like we talked about last week, stable, and repetition, and maybe even mundane, like where's the meaning? And the other thing I think when I start thinking about Jesus, then I'm like, oh, okay. So we read the scripture, we don't realize something. One is that there had already been quite a few failed messiahs who had been crushed by the Roman government.
Quite recently.
You now have 12 disciples following a pretty charismatic person who's actually hiding out in Galilee, avoiding major places, but he's affecting 5,000 people. Right. Like this is a Messiah-like character who is having impact, and you can tell if you read underneath the language of all four Gospels that the leaders, and in particular the sort of mob-style Sadducee, Pharisee kind of thing that's going on, like where they're going to kill you, they're looking to kill you. It's tense, and in the midst of that tense intensity, you have 12 men and a bunch of women, but 12 men with different agendas. It's very clear. And Jesus says in the midst of that, don't hinder the little children. He starts talking about the people who are slow and don't get it.
Yep.
And I think that part of me is like, okay, we talk about all these politics, but it's about these little children. It's about your daughter. It's about there is a sense of the vulnerable, the weak, and those who have not yet been so jaded to it all, that God's called us to protect, to care for, to listen to, and to follow, in a sense, and be like. And I think
now the question would be: is that just on a hyper local level, or are you supposed to look out for those people, nationally and internationally at all? I know there's only so much we can do, but I think that's one of the questions that comes up right now. Some fears about the current administration and the damage being done to such people.
So here's my
or
thing.
Potentially, I'm saying this is an honest.
No, I think I have a relatively good answer for it. Like people will tell me, and now that I've been a pastor a long time and I've done creative things, people come and ask me questions about like how to get started, how to do these things, and I always tell them, tell me what you're doing now,
right?
Because you lean into what you're doing now. What you're doing now is all you're going to do in your ministry, right? I don't think that somehow you're going to take care of children like that's your thing, and we need to fight for that. And you're going to write a few blogs, and you're going to type a few comments. No, like what are you doing right now?
Start
in your life
in front of you
to take care of the children who are in front of you, and that will move you towards taking care of the next set of children. And God, the thing about God is you turn your like mind and your will towards the things that He's already about. He'll open so many doors for you, you barely know what to do with yourself.
We had a teacher, a pastor from Phoenix at our class yesterday, Thursday morning, who has disabled children. And they're a very specific disability where the medical care, I believe, is like almost $1 million a year for just the medication required to for them to live.
Mm-hmm.
And he was talking about how they've worked with the community that's advocated for their care and for you can extend their life by 20, 30 years, and that it's worth it, that their life is worth that investment. And he was talking about how that, he's been in meetings in DC that changed votes, on the Senate floor because of it. But so the doors opened, and he was talking about his grief of what's happening now in regard to that issue, but he's been in it for a long time, and knows it deeply. And so that was interesting. It's like it wasn't theoretical. It's not just an online like this is an issue he's deeply familiar with. He's advocated for it at the highest level, still is.
Yeah. And that's my thing is like if you're like worried about the policies that are going to come down that are affecting people here who haven't gone through like the proper channels, so to speak, right? And to be here, they're quote unquote illegal immigrants. Like if you're not amongst those people, then you won't really have a great sense of how the policies are impacting them and then how to advocate for them. So you can't say, well, I want to do that. Like, we can't, you go be part of it, and that will lead you through to the advocacy.
Now, what about though? Like, so you've got, because, that particular issue is very polarizing around here. And I think there's folks in my community who have mixed views on this, but like I guess like as they're trying to work together, the disconnect happens when you talk and you admit your view, and then somebody looks at you and goes, "How could you?" Right? And then as we were talking about earlier, instead of working that out slowly and with time, it's just like I can't be around a person like you. Now, I don't know. To be honest, I struggle here because on the flip side, there's the whole like. And this is the secular phrase for it, like self-care and stuff. So if you're coming from a community that's had a lot of anxiety for a long time and you're really, really weary and then you've got to like advocate for yourself and you're one of the few that feels this way and you've been advocating for yourself for a long time. I don't know as a pastor when to tell them you have to keep fighting this fight for yourself. And when
Well, why would you fight? I'm confused. Like fighting for yourself? What do you mean?
Well, for you and your community. So, okay. So like you've got, somebody in our church who is concerned about the immigration issue has been involved in it for decades. And there's somebody in the church who has an opinion on it who is not involved. This person who's been involved, who's scared, nervous, is it their role to say something, or is it the church's role to say something on their behalf as somebody who, or this is where it gets complicated.
So I don't actually think it's that complicated. I mean, that person who's advocating, they don't need to say anything.
Sure.
They just need to do what God's called them to do.
Keep doing it. Yeah.
And the beauty of it is that they need a rest. God's sovereign. They can take a break.
Yeah.
I think that's the part of our culture demands that we not have cognitive dissonance.
Right.
But my experience is that I think about the Good Samaritan, and I think if you sat the Samaritan down and said, what do you feel about the Jewish-Samaritan relations? He probably would have some strong opinions about Jewish people and their prejudices.
Of course.
And maybe his own people. But he may even have his own prejudices. But when faced when faced with someone who is helpless in front of him, not seeking out Jewish, people, beat up by robbers.
Yeah.
That wasn't his like, what do you do in life? Well, I seek out people who've been, no.
He didn't get a job with an agency doing that.
Right.
Just encountered it. Yeah.
My parents are definitely relatively conservative and against illegal immigration and probably in favor, particularly my mother, but in favor of much of what Donald Trump wants to do on the border.
Sure.
Okay. But my parents financially cared for a number of people who were here illegally.
Right.
Did not report them, cared for them, provided for them, tried to get their children into places where they could succeed.
Yeah.
Because that's who was in front of them.
Right.
So as a citizen, there's no thing of saying, hey, I think this is a good thing. And then, or not a good thing. And then there's who's in front of me and what kinds of, how is God inviting me to treat them as a human being created in the image of God?
I know people like who would, I think, engage in both of those as well. So anyway, like that's all.
I don't know. I now you got me. See, that's why you got me going. And then it's like, okay.
Right.
Here we go.
No, that's good. I don't want to make you go somewhere you don't want to go. But I think what and even less getting into the policies, I think I'm thinking through where our communities are at. And do you just not talk? So one of the things you were saying there, you were talking about the poor and the weak in front of you. And then I made it a little macro and said, what about advocating, more broadly? And that's something I'm torn with. I think our church does a really good job with those who are in front of us, or we try, and it's hard to discern how to do that exactly and how to do it right.
Yeah.
But our church tries. We try really hard. We aren't doing a lot of lobbying, but we're trying in our context, in our midst, those who
well, and
show
I would
up.
argue that Jesus, at least seems to me that Jesus did very little lobbying.
Right.
And in the early church, they took care of their own. You go back, you can
they took care of vulnerable in the society that nobody else wanted to take care of.
Right.
Yep.
And they invited them into their space. And that's I always think it's funny, and I think it's a stupid thing where, I see the little, I don't know if they're reels or whatever they are, where the conservatives bring some, fake illegal immigrants and say, hey, they go to a place where it's got a sign in front of the lawn saying, Biden, blah, blah, blah. And they say, hey, would you like these people, can these people come house with you?
Sure.
And they're like, no, I have a baby. We can't. And they're trying to make a point. And I think but I think that's about us as followers of Jesus. Yeah. Like, we think that we own everything. We own our homes, we own our cars, they're ours. I think it's the biggest sin of the evangelical church, and I'm in it. That it's my stuff, my money, my home.
Yeah.
But by the way, I'm an exile
and we want the
government.
We want the government to do what we aren't willing to do ourselves. I think that. So where I'm kind of treading toward right now is saying, and I think this gets back to what you said at the beginning, and maybe what I'm sensing. I do think we need to distinguish ourselves from the empire and be clear to our people, like, that is what it is. And then there is God's kingdom, of which we are a part. It seems to me that one of our strongest political acts would be to actually inhabit or live out the alternative calling. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of our, again, friends and neighbors, some just don't know. Some don't see what we're doing.
Right.
And there's that. But some look and with, for good reason, say, you just get together, get happy and clap and go home and critique this other stuff. You're not doing anything. And it seems as if that is part of it. The other thing I was actually going to maybe slightly... not really push back on you, but earlier you were talking about doing the thing. And it's the thing that gets overwhelming is each one of us, we can only do so much. We are, so I look at all the issues presenting in the world and I'm like, I don't even know if I'm keeping up with the basic pastoring I'm supposed to do. And I think a lot of people feel that way, where they look at all the issues. And so I can think of families right now who I think feel a lot of burden to do a lot, but they're raising their kids. Mm-hmm. They're tired. They're just crashing into bed at the end of the day and going, how do I do more? And so there's this, the flip side of that, there's a pressure where it's like, if it's on the church and we don't have any gas, what do you do with that?
So here's my pushback on your pushback.
Sure.
So what I push back, well, it's just not really a pushback.
Yeah.
A couple things. You shouldn't be doing anything. And my answer to people who are saying, I want to do this ministry and I have this calling, or I want to get started going, then it's like, well, what are you doing now? Because what you're doing now is what you're going to do when you're in the ministry. So if you're not helping people, Like, however it is, you want to become a counselor, you want to become a pastor, you want to become an advocate for any particular group. Are you advocating at any level now? Are you engaging in any kind of pastoral activity?
Right.
Are you, what are you doing? Because whatever you do with one talent, with whatever the resources you have now, is what you're going to do when you step into it full time. That's all I'm saying. When it comes to the church, I would say between the ages, and I told someone this, like, I think the church should be run in general by people who are 18 to 28 and people who are about 55 to 75.
Yeah.
That's who should run the church, because
that middle group that's raising their little ones.
and the trough league gears, they're trying to keep their head above water. They're trying to establish themselves.
Yeah.
Yes. Should they be doing stuff in ministry? Yeah. They come alongside the church financially. They come alongside the church in the ministry to their children and to their children's friends. And then there's a lot of other crap that's going on and all of that. But my point really is that you got children, they're your ministry. That's what Jesus says.
Yeah.
Like, how did the church grow in the early church? Because they had more babies and they adopted more children, they had big families, and they grew that way.
And how are you going to shape the future? You're going to have to invest in
Children. Right.
Yeah.
And not
a lot of the people that whose minds you want to change who are 50 years old, you're never going to.
Right. Yeah.
Honestly.
And then your children are going to cause you a ton of problems. Anyway, so you're going to grow and be shaped by all of that. And they're going to be a lot of great joys in all of it.
And some of the things you instill in them are the things they're going to look at and say, that's exactly upside down, Dad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing is, so, like, we are called ministers of reconciliation. The whole job of the church is to bring a set of people who are moving from being an old person to the new person, living into that identity and reconciling one another as we rub up against each other.
So what do you say? I agree with that. I think obviously that's just scriptural.
It's messy.
Yeah, it is. And so when somebody says that messy is stressful, I want to go where I don't have to do that. Now, you can't control it, but there's a lot of, and maybe this is me even admitting, remember my thing about the concert? Mm-hmm. I don't want to do this right now. I want to break. I think a lot of people when they come to church are like me at the concert, where they're going, yeah, I don't want to do hard stuff right now. Like, the world's hard. Instagram's telling me about how everybody feels, and Facebook, tells me how they feel, on a bigger screen. And then I don't want to, this is,
yes, but it is a I think the sin of the generations, the last three anyway, is that we don't want to do the hard work internally. We just want to talk about it.
And what's that going to do to our world, society?
Well, there's two things that Jesus says. One, he says, I think it's Luke 9. He says, to be a disciple, you're going to have to take up your cross. And he also says, it's hard for rich people. That would be all of us in the United States, no matter who you are, to get into the kingdom of God, because the wide path is really easy.
Right.
And so, my argument is following Jesus, and this is me looking in the mirror, following Jesus is hard. It's got great joys, and the burden is light, and Jesus is gentle and humble. But it's not for the faint of heart. It's not for people who are like, hey, I want everything to be good. No, because you're called into the storm, not away from the storm.
So I do hear a critique in there for people in the church who want to be comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so what does that say to me, Eric?
Mm-hmm.
As or to yourself, because we on our way in here talked about how we just are tired of, we don't want to stir it up. We don't want our church to fracture again, right? I'm not saying we go the way of, take Donald Trump's cues on this, or take, Joe Biden's cues on this, but what is the pushback on you and me?
Well, to answer like why I don't like to walk into these things, is that for 24 years, I grew up in the conservative world, and I was highly political, and I believed that God had people that he was appointing. It was my job to get them there and to fight for truth, and that anyone who believed differently anyone who might think about things differently is destructive to our country. That person I put to death and am putting to death. And that person, when I talk about politics or when conservative people like Donald Trump come into power and they say things that resonate with that old person, I can feel him rising up and feel like he wants to say some stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't agree with him.
Yeah.
But,
this is you. Your team. Yeah.
And it's not that I don't think the conservative community has good things to say. Don't be saying that. But there is a particular kind of lack of humility, lack of understanding, and an arrogance that still exists there in me. And so that's why I don't want to talk about it, because I don't want to say something stupid. I don't want to say something hurtful.
You don't want to screw it up. Yeah.
And I do want to live in a gospel upside down kingdom, where I am in submission to God and giving dignity to people, even if I disagree with them, and caring for their basic needs and trying to point them towards Jesus.
Yeah.
And trust him that he can transform us into a people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's
there you go. There's
that's
my
real.
answer to that.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Why don't you want to talk about it?
Well, I think it's a little different for me. I think that, I mean, not entirely. So I probably didn't quite do that version. Growing up in a poorer family, we were always the outcasts in the church. My dad was in the union when everybody in our church thought that was bad.
My dad was in the union too. He was a teacher.
And I mean, it depends on your vocation, whether or not that made sense, right? So my dad was a lumber worker, but there was we were always kind of the ones that kept our mouths shut about how we viewed things. Yeah. I noticed my parents were always in conservative spaces, often had more. I would say, you as you like to razz me for, more nuanced views where they weren't one or the other,
right? But
they also were well aware that they didn't fit and that they had no say, and so they just didn't say anything and just kind of went along with it, but would sometimes on the car ride home go,
right.
And so for me, I am not my parents. I'm not in a position of, I'm not in poverty or in the minority, and trying to figure out how to steward my voice while also being radically committed to the unity of the body of Christ is just confusing. Mm-hmm. And I think honestly for me, I second guess which is it the moment to bring clarity, or is it the moment to bring unity? And I just think it's hard to tell. And so for me, I do not like, I struggle with being pushed to speak when I'm not sure. And to me, it is just more complex and confusing. Some people seem to just feel very clear on the issue. It's that or that. I just don't feel that way. I don't like to act like I do. And so, but sometimes I wonder if that's just being afraid. So I think I'm just unsure. I think that part of my, and then I'm just wounded. I think there's just a lot of, I put a lot of, I want to have close relationships in the church, and a lot of them have broken up over the years because of disagreements like this. And so I feel that weariness and woundedness.
Yeah, sure.
Like, do I want to, the dual struggle for me is even to like let people get close anymore. And that seems like if I'm going to be honest about how I feel about things, then it feels like, well, I just shouldn't let people get close.
Yeah.
And then if you do start to let people get close, then it feels like, well, maybe I can't be totally honest anymore. Feels like it's a rare thing as a leader, probably, to be able to experience both, where it's like I can tell you what I really think and have hope that we'll still have a relationship, even if you disagree with me.
Right.
I think for me, it's more, less a fear that I'll say the wrong thing or the old me will come out. I have put my foot in my mouth, though, for sure.
No, sure. Just in different ways. We podcasted about it.
Yeah. And, but I think it's more,
Yes. No, I understand.
the relational risk involved. It's just at some point you just start feeling quite pummeled over the years. So, and not that anybody's out to get me. I don't think it is. I think it's just people going, it's the same stuff. It's the same stuff I feel. They're saying, yeah, I don't want to face this. I don't want to deal with the hardships. So I'm just going to go somewhere.
Well, I mean, the village, well, I mean, I would agree. And I know this kind of thing. I mean, the village has run under the radar a lot, but at times things would get back to me like, oh, the village is being called the pro-abortion church. I'm like,
right.
What?
Yeah.
Do they know who we are? But because of the way that we address politics and allow people to have process and go through
you don't, just because somebody has a view doesn't mean you exclude them.
Yeah.
Yep. Same.
Yeah. And other things like that have often come to our attention because of the way we articulate things.
Yeah.
On the other hand, nobody knows about the village anyway. So, like, we were joking in our church or in our staff meeting or leadership meeting. I don't remember what it was. That the village has a PR problem. That, like, either people just don't know, they don't care, or they, just have a misunderstanding of who we are and what we do.
Sure. Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a thing. Yep.
All right. Well, hey, thank you for sharing that. And I think this was a good podcast.
Yeah.
It was good. A thing I love about sitting down and talking to you, as soon as the mics hit us, like, we are just so used to talking to each other, and it's just like effortless. I love it.
Yeah, same.
I really love hanging out with you. So anyway, guys, thank you for listening to Faith Over Breakfast. And again, the big part is, our newest push is be our social media team. Share us.
That's right.
We're trying. Our goal is 5 shares an episode. And here's the reason, by the way.
Goal.
I've been looking at the data recently, and what I've noticed all of a sudden is more and more people are launching off of Facebook to listen to our podcast.
Oh.
It used to be 0, and it's jumped significantly. So it means that people are finding it and listening to it. So the more you share it, the better, the more we get out there and people can hear about the village and mission and Andy and Eric.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Since we have a PR problem.
We also, Faith Over Breakfast also has a PR problem. So get us out there.
Solve our PR problem. Okay. You can always email us. You can text message us through your podcast apps if you have an idea for a topic. We, as you've experienced this year, those are some of our favorite episodes, or where we get to respond to.
I noticed that the second question from Brian Betts is about John Mark Comer.
Sure.
And I know a lot of people in my church like him. So we should maybe talk about him.
Yeah, we definitely
his
should.
Impact on culture. That would be very cool.
Totally. Yep. Yeah, I'm all for that, and we'll keep talking about the stuff you send us. So sometimes, if you give us a lot of questions, we might get to one now, one later. We'll see, but keep sending them, and the more variety of people and questions, the better.
Yeah.
So send them on over. We look forward to it, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah. You've been listening to Faith Over Breakfast with Pastor Eric Siepen and Pastor Andy Littleton. Please share us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you.